Okay, Alex, we're streaming on YouTube and we are recording the meeting, so you can get started whenever you would like. We do still have a few folks coming in.
Great. I'll give it just another moment to let those last few people come in, and then we'll get started here in just a moment.
Oh dear.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We do have a few other people joining, but for the sake of time, we definitely want to kind of get rolling here today. Again, welcome to kind of this, our final, actually, 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Working Group meeting. And I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Again, my name is Alex Trauger. I'm a senior planner here at Metro Plan Orlando and the project manager for the 2045 plan. And I'm going to be leading us through today's meeting. We also have a team of folks who work to ensure this meeting runs smoothly, as we do for all of our Metro Plan meetings. So many thanks to them. But you as working group members, please keep your microphones muted unless you've been recognized to speak. And we do and can use your raise hands feature to participate in the discussion. That's located, I believe, under participants, and then the raise hand option. It is there, so you can do that as needed. We also have the chat function. Please only use this if you're having technical issues or need assistance, and please know that the chat record does become part of our final meeting summary. We also want to make sure that all future meetings of this group, but also all Metro Plan Orlando future online meetings, are accessible to all, and participants may join by computer, tablet, phone, and if you need accommodations at any time, please contact Metro Plan Orlando. You go to the next slide, please, Alani. Please contact Metro Plan Orlando staff for assistance. Go to the next slide, and there's also a public comment period near the end of the agenda for this meeting. Members of the public who wish to speak can use their raise hand feature found in the participants tab. But if you're only listening in by phone, you can also hit *9 to raise your hand and request to be recognized. When you're called on, please use the microphone, of course, and that mic will be temporarily unmuted. We ask that you state your name and contact information for the record. We also accepted comments for this meeting by email and phone message before the meeting, and the guidelines for the public comments are also posted on our website, metroplanorlando.org/virtual meetings. At this time, though, I'm going to go ahead and call attendance. So if all working group members, please go ahead and unmute yourselves in preparation for the roll call. And then if you could mute yourself again after your name is called. And if you could, please make sure your video is on, so make sure it's you. It's always good to see those faces during these virtual meetings. And I'll call roll here in just a second. Great. Bill Wharton? Bill? Bob O'Malley?
Here.
Good morning, Bob. Brad Friel? Carol Scott? We have Sayosi.
Carol Scott.
Good morning, Sayosi. Cheryl Stone? Good morning. Chris Cairns?
Here.
Good morning. Dr. Conroy Jacobs? See you, Conroy. Give Conroy a second. Dan Stevens, Dr. Stevens? Daryl Kronk?
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Fred Milch? I see you muted there, but I see you, Fred.
Good morning.
Good morning. Graciela? Good morning. Hazem Elazar?
Present.
Morning, Hanson. Jeff Pegram, see you. That moving. If you guys could unmute your mics again, if you have not been called on, just so we can keep this moving. Jim Martin. All right, Kathy Lee. Yes.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Kathy. Kelly Brock.
Here.
Lee Pullum.
Here.
Michael Aller. Miles, good morning. See ya.
Morning.
Rachel Cobb.
Here.
Good morning. Rakina Henson. Tara McHugh. Fred, are you filling in for Tara today? Yes, sir. Tamika Monterville. All right, Denise White.
Good morning.
Good morning, Denise. Have you. And Will Hawthorne.
I'm here.
Good morning, everyone. Great, thank you for that. We can go ahead and mute your mics again, and we'll go ahead and jump right into core content for today. I will say, and as with all these working group meetings, if you have a question during any time during the meeting, raise that virtual hand. If we're not seeing that virtual hand, unmute yourself, say, hey, we want to be heard. We want to make sure that you have the ability to ask questions and have discussion about different topics that don't have to wait until the end of the meeting. So with that being said, just going to briefly talk about work to date and really the planning process in general. We can go to the next slide, please. And really, as it relates to work to date, we kicked things off over 2 years ago as it relates to working with DOT on developing some of the forecasting tools and input data. But it all started with a recognition that we were going to do business, conduct this plan differently. And because of that, we had to start looking at data sources differently and started preparing some information and products that we traditionally hadn't prepared for a long range plan. So, early on in the process, we, prepared an existing conditions analysis and developed some online tools to help you view and sort through that information. And that helped us as we developed scenarios. We had our baseline conditions, but also as we kind of time capsule, 2020, that data will help kind of tell a story for the future as it relates to trends and inflection points. We spent a lot of time in step 2 looking at vision, what's important no matter what. So we looked at goals and objectives and had a discussion about performance-based planning and performance measurement. And you heard about our congestion management process, which takes those narrative goals and objectives and focuses on performance planning, performance measurement, and strategies to accomplish those goals and objectives. Technical analysis was step 3. This is where scenario planning and needs assessment. This is where really everything came together as part of the planning process. And with this group, as well as our advisory committees, we spent a lot of time talking about methodologies that were new to this plan. And I'll talk about why that was the case. But we had a lot of new methods, a lot of new approaches for this 2045 plan. And because of that, we yielded very different results than we would have if we would have followed the traditional process. Over the past really 8 weeks, we've been focusing on developing that cost feasible plan, based on the needs assessment and findings from the public, is really starting putting together a tangible plan. What can we afford and what is unfunded? And that's where we're at in the planning process now, really between steps 4 and 5. And as Cynthia will talk about in a moment, public participation, your engagement, and the coordination with our agency partners has really helped shape the plan, and will continue to help shape the plan as we're going through the agency and public participation period now. We can go to the next slide. So since we met last, a little over 60 days ago, or about 50 days ago now, we've taken the needs assessment process to our advisory committees, as well as to our board of directors, and presented those preliminary needs. And in some cases, and for those who participate in our advisory committee process, our technical advisory committee and our Citizens Advisory Committee have actually heard some form of today's presentation. We're going to be going into a little more detail as the time is available to us. But we've prepared a cost feasible plan, a draft cost feasible plan, and we've initiated that public comment period. So, like I said, from everything we've heard, from all of our research and analysis, we have put together a plan that that considers the feedback we've received, but also is responsive to federal guidelines and requirements. And this is kind of where we're at in the process. And we're going to talk through the different elements today, from what we heard to what the plan is shaped up, and what really those key topics that kind of drove the plan. So with that, we can go to the next slide. And actually, before we do that, does anyone have any questions about anything before I hand off to Cynthia to talk about public participation? Give you guys a second just in case. All right, hearing none, seeing none, I'll pass the mic over to Cynthia.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, if you all, feel free to pop in with any questions or thoughts you might have as we go through today's presentation. And just as a reminder, you can find that raise hands button if you click on participants and look at the bottom of that participants window. You should see your raised hand button. So I can't believe it's our last meeting with you already. It seems like we just began this process. It both seems short and long at the same time. But I'm going to talk a little bit about public participation today. So I will share some wrap-up stats with you and share really how this plan, more than any other, has taken into account the public voice. So we're really proud of that. And we're glad that you have supported us through this whole process. And if you hear nothing else from today's meeting, we hope you hear a big thank you from us, because we really appreciate your participation throughout this whole process. So we know it's been a lot of time, and we want you to know that we appreciate it. So next slide, please. If y'all remember, about, almost pretty much a year ago, we started our public participation. One more slide, Leilani. You take a look at the timeline. We started our preparation work really back last summer last year, and then we began our active outreach in November. And so we have continued our community outreach this whole time, and including some fun changes during the pandemic, as I talked about last month with you. So today we are actually in the public comment period for our draft 2045 plan. And so our comment window is going, it opened on October 16th, and it's going all the way through November 20th. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all those comments that we receive, summarize them for our board, present them all to our board, and make sure that they have that feedback before they actually take action on the 2045 plan at their December 9th meeting. That's kind of the timeline that we have left here. So we're in the home stretch. Next slide. So to share some key outreach results with you, we've had a lot of wonderful interactions with Central Floridians during this process. And as you know, transportation planning is really not a topic that's common knowledge in most households. And so education is always a really big focus for us when we do our outreach. We want to let people know, one, that planning exists. There is actually an organization that's looking to the future. We know sometimes people question that, but we assure them that there's a lot of work going on, and it takes a really long time to bring a transportation project to life. And so these plans have to take shape years and years ahead of time. But we also want to let the public know that they can actually participate in that process and have the opportunity to, one, have their voice heard, and to actually have an effect, an impact on the projects that go into the plan. So we counted what we call significant interactions with folks. You see the number here on the screen, and this is anytime somebody, either we had a conversation with folks, they watched a video on a transportation planning topic, or they participated in one of our programs. They spent some time looking through documents on our website. So these would be what I call teachable moments that we've had with members of the community. As far as direct input through either surveys or polls, we've had almost a couple thousand people participate that way so far. We still, of course, have those public comments coming in. And we have an event coming up next week, which I will share details with you about in just a moment. Youth outreach has been a big focus for us this time around. We shared with you all several months ago our new fun youth activity books. So we have gotten those to nearly 1,000 youths in our 3-county area. So we will continue to put a focus on that in the next couple of years, as our board is very interested in making sure that those future generations, the ones who will actually be affected by this plan, really start to learn a little bit more about it. And we also count our message reach as far as social media. We're really active on social media, I think, as most of you know. And so all of these things we track through our public participation report. And I'll let you know where you can find that online in just a moment if you want to read the details about some of the strategies that we use. But the good news is that we're on track to meet all the public participation objectives that we set for ourselves at the beginning of this process. So that's why we make a plan, we execute it, and then we come back and evaluate it. So this is part of the evaluation process, and happy to report that even with the pandemic, we are doing well and meeting our objectives. Next slide. So to remind you of some common themes from input, I went into detail on these with you last time, but just as a reminder, so we asked about some key topics when it came to our 2045 plan. One was those 5 goal areas that you've heard a lot from us about. So when we asked the public to rank those, people had a really hard time with that. And so they thought that all of those goals were equally important. So there are a lot of things that folks expect out of the transportation system. And so that's what we really took away from those close rankings, was that, okay, well, we expected maybe 1 or 2 to really rise to the top, but they were really clustered quite close when we took a look at those. So folks just think that we should shoot for all of those things, and that's fine with us. And as we compared our pre-pandemic and post-pandemic results, we did see a little bit of a shift in the goals that people valued the most before the pandemic. Access and connectivity was the top goal that was at the top of the ranking list. And after the pandemic, investment in economy came to the top. Sorry, I think that's Amazon at my door. So with the state of the economy, that's really not a surprise that that rose to the top during the pandemic. And when we asked about top desired changes, what are the 3 top things that you want to see that could make the biggest change to our transportation system over the next 20 years? We heard very loudly the same 3 things all along. So one was that people want technology used to try and improve congestion, especially the use of smart signals that adapt for congestion. And the other 2 have to do with public transportation, both bus and rail. So people want to see more frequent public transportation that takes them to more places. And they also want better first and last mile connections. So they want to be able to get more easily from their home to the transit system or to their final destination. Next slide. And when we take a look at how this feedback that we received actually shaped the plan decisions, we have some concrete examples to share with you here. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are the big ones. Weighting of performance measures. We had originally intended to actually apply weights to our performance measures to emphasize some of those goal areas over the others. But when we heard that the public thought that all of those goals were equally important, we decided not to weight those measures. So they are all have equal weight when we score our projects. The second is funding allocations. You're going to hear some details from these specific funding programs that we've set up from Alex, but we increased the amount of funding that we set aside to be able to support some of those desired changes that the public want. So specific funds for premium transit, for technology investment, for complete streets. So stay tuned on the details for that. Scenario planning, as you all know, this is the first plan we've done where we did scenario planning. And so you all helped us to shape those scenarios. You told us that you thought that we should plan for a future that perhaps was not always positive all the time. And so in response to the feedback that we received from you all, we made adjustments to those scenarios and introduced a new one called Disruption Dilemmas, where we took a look at that kind of low growth future for our area. And so you also, your input also helped us refine a lot of the strategies that went into what we will suggest to the region that the region should do to kind of prepare for these alternative futures to get us where we need to be as a region. And the fourth was adjusting technical methodology. We had some wonderful input from our committees and from you, the working group, throughout. You said, is this in there? Is that in there? How did you take a look at one thing or another? So we were constantly making sure that we included your expectations to make sure that your concerns were being addressed throughout all the details of the technical process as well. So again, thank you for all the time that you took to give us feedback during the meetings and in between the meetings as well. Next slide. So we have a landing page set up. And if you haven't been to this page yet, please write down this URL and share on your social media channels. We would appreciate that. metroplanorlando.org/2045 draft plan. This will take you to the landing page for our draft plan documents. And we're calling this a virtual tour of the draft plan. So on here, you will find the actual PDF that is the plan. It's called the cost feasible plan. You'll find instructions on how to comment. You will find links to excerpts of all the separate project lists. So if you have a certain type of project that you're looking specifically for, there are separate links to all those lists. You'll also find on here the public participation report as well. And you can take a read through that. Next slide, please. And we also have on here a link to our webinar that we are having. It's called 2045 Plan, The Reveal. It's going to be taking place on Monday at 5:30. And so this is our public meeting where we will be hitting some of the highlights of what is in the long range or the Metropolitan Transportation Plan rather. And we'll also be taking public comment. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, please feel free to do that. If you go to that landing page, you'll find a link to the Zoom registration there. And so we're taking comments in 4 different ways. One is an online comment form that we have on that page. We're taking a good old-fashioned email. Again, live public comments during our Monday webinar. And then we've also set up a public comment line where people can call in and leave a message if they'd like to have that recorded. And so we're taking all that and creating a public record of all the comments. And like I mentioned, we're going to give those to the board so that they can make sure and take all this public comment into consideration before they vote on the plan. So that is all I have for you. If there are any questions on the public participation process, I will be happy to take those. And if there are not, then I will pass it over to Alex. And I will mention also, last time there was a request for a social media kit to share some of the videos that we had. And so I'm going to be sending to you all after the meeting today a social media kit, also especially for this webinar that's coming up. So if you do want to share on your social channels, all you'll have to do is copy and paste, and I will include a couple of graphics as well. So are there any questions or comments? Oh, Graciela, I see you talking, but I don't hear you.
No?
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Can you hear me? Okay, awesome.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a brief comment, really a compliment and a thank you to the team. You all came to one of our community agency partner meetings and engaged a team of nonprofit leaders, and the engagement was just that. It was very engaging. It was not just a speaking to a group, it was engaging them in a conversation. So I just wanted to commend the team for doing a great job in engaging the public through this process.
Thank you. And we appreciate you all making the connections too. We had so many great suggestions of groups to reach out to. I wish we could have reached so many more in person, but unfortunately the world had other plans, but thank you. That group was wonderful. Any other comments? You can go ahead and unmute and speak if you want. Don't even worry about the raised hands. Okay, if not, I will pass it back over to Alex.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and cover a couple key topics here. We can go to the next slide, but for those who have already heard this before, I'm kind of going to say it again because I think it is really that important. And this is really putting together, what is a cost feasible plan? A lot of the work that we do, as part of the long range planning process, is intended to satisfy federal requirements as part of our organization, staying certified to keep those federal and state funds flowing to the region, to our local partners. But in a nutshell, the cost feasible plan is about identifying needs, and like I said, we've talked about methods probably ad nauseum with this group and others, but we went through a new and different needs assessment process this time around. And as part of that, we identified costs for those projects, and we identified costs for all phases of a transportation project, including those additional environmental costs that are typically left outside of the long-range planning process and discovered and resolved, typically, in the project development phase. But we're trying to head those off early in the process, identify some of those fatal flaws and the cost associated early on. Prioritization, what's most important. We can't afford it all. That's known, and that's kind of a daily kind of life kind of inflection point that we have. But so we have to prioritize what's most important. We used our goals and objectives, and as Cynthia mentioned originally, we're following a multi-criteria decision analysis framework, and traditionally you can use weighting as part of that to kind of differentiate and to provide preferential scoring to certain sets of factors, but based on the feedback both from just kind of general survey through kind of typical public participation, but also through our public opinion, it really was fractions of a point between goals and objectives. So and the reality is, as Cynthia said, everything is important, and that's because transportation really has indirectly or directly relates to kind of every other aspect of life. It's a means to an end, and everything equals quality of life and prosperity. But at the end of the day, we had to prioritize what was most important with the finite resources that we have. And those resources are the available revenues. And in our case, those are federal and state funds that flow from gas tax revenues. So keep that in mind as we're talking about what's cost feasible, and what's happening today. What are those impacts based on fuel consumption changes and travel behavior changes that each of us have likely made over the past 6 to 9 months. But with those federal funds and some of those state funds, our board has direct control, and based on their prerogative, we're able to fund certain programs to higher percentages. And as part of this plan, we followed our board's policies and how they would like us to divide, our urban area funds, as well as how they want to target, certain modes or emphasis areas. So we considered that as part of the planning process, and I'll talk about that more here in a moment. But at the end of the day, right, we went through a lot of technical analysis and a scenario planning process and a public participation process. But at the end of the day, it was all about identifying a set of cost feasible projects and acknowledging that there are finite needs, but finite resources, but infinite needs. So that second element of this plan is our unfunded needs, and making sure that we maintain that regional vision. Even though we can't afford it based on existing resources, it's that acknowledgement that this is still the transportation future our region desires. So we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to cover a couple key topics with you here, and we spoke about these briefly at your last working group meeting. We were kind of rushed through this part of the presentation based on time. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I see a hand from Mayor McDonald.
Certainly. Mayor, you have a question?
I just happy to be a part of the program today. Took me a while to figure it out. Thank you.
No, we're glad to have you. Thanks for joining us, Mayor. Great. So back to these key topics. Like I said, we had to move through them pretty quickly at the last working group, and even with our advisory committee. So we figured we'd talk about these priorities and really the significance to what some of them mean, kind of in today's terms. And the first is about existing priorities. As part of our needs assessment process, we made sure that we considered everything. So we looked at our prioritized projects list. We looked at other plans and studies that were going on. Our transportation improvement program, that's our kind of 5-year work program that our board adopts. So we included all that in the needs assessment. But then as we started developing the cost feasible plan and we started prioritizing projects, the question was raised, what's safe, what's grandfathered, what continues, especially with so many new processes that are focused more on health and access and safety rather than just vehicle capacity. So the plan was to, originally fund projects that had a project development or environmental phase or a subsequent phase. Those were, and if those phases were funded in our current transportation improvement program, our current TIP, we would follow through with those projects. Some of the circumstances that we're experiencing today is us needing to, and it was kind of a committed discussion of, projects that are fully funded in the next 5 years. Those were almost a given. We considered those committed, and they didn't even really show up on the books. But with the circumstances of today, with the gas tax receipts coming in less and less, and some serious shortfalls statewide, it's important for us to acknowledge that the projects that are fully funded are really our first priority, and that's the acknowledgement here. And I know some of you as local agencies have had that comment and concern, and we just want to let you know that projects that are fully funded in the work, in our TIP, we will commit to finish those. So as we adopt this plan, and things may happen come January, February, as more information is available on kind of those revenue shortfalls, we'll be able to respond and ensure those projects remain top priorities and are funded first as part of this long range planning process. So something that we really wouldn't talk about, but another one of those kind of pandemic dilemmas, that we're facing, disruption dilemmas that we're facing. And it's really that acknowledging just that, is that we will follow through, even if it's committed, fully funded today. Any questions on that before I move on this topic? Give it a second. I know I uncanned a lot there. All right, we can go to the next slide. And we can go actually to the next slide. Sorry about that. So the next key topic is really funding policies, and I mentioned it before. The majority of our what Metro Plan Orlando is responsible for is really federal and state funds, especially within the urbanized area. And in some cases, federal law and guidance provides the MPO the latitude and the ability to spend funds, to accomplish their performance targets and regional desires. And with that, based on the needs assessment process, based on the scenario planning findings that we went through, that exercise, and public participation, what we heard, we looked at our existing funding policies and said we can do more to strategically and to target fund certain programs to make sure that we're making a difference. And this is one of those recognitions that this is very different than past plans. Past plans, we would have kind of lumped it all together and funded a bunch of widening projects, which was okay at that time. But just based on a lot of the feedback and the desires that we have, to accomplish them, to correct some of the issues that we've identified, we need to be a little more targeted in how we're accomplishing these programs. So with that, we're following our board's policy for spending, urbanized area funds. Those are our TMA funds. That's both our SU, which is kind of our urbanized area roadway fund, and TALU, which is transportation alternatives fund. So these are typically bike ped monies, and they can be used for other things. We group them together and spend them based on our board's policy: 32% for complete streets, 17% for active transportation, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, 21% of those funds for systems management operations, and 30% for regional transit, so public transit there. But as part of the plan, we also identified and looked at other things that we could do with the funds to make a difference. And as it relates to our other arterial funds, these are, kind of the DDR funds, kind of district dedicated revenue, but other state funds, based on, where we have the latitude, we're identifying 10% of those other arterial funds for off-system capacity. So this is going to allow our local partners to solve some of the capacity or reliability challenges that they have on their local network. So that's new to this plan and helps our local partners in funding some of those key key corridors. We're also identifying and following through with our board's policy to fund premium transit. So up to 30% of our district dedicated revenue funds through 2036 through 2045 are actually going to be going towards premium transit services. We've also, as part of the scenario planning process and needs assessment process, we took a deeper look at our TMA, our urbanized area funds. And we also wanted to make sure that we had kind of a one-to-one connection between our other planning and core MPO products, and one of them being our Unified Planning Work Program, which is really our annual operating budget. We've brought, federal and state funds into the budget to do certain things over the past years, but with this plan, it's acknowledging, and that full accounting of federal and state funds and how we're spending it. So $1 million annually to special studies, that's helped us, plan and support our local partners, especially those who don't have kind of a deep bench in the planning department. So, we've helped conduct feasibility studies, corridor studies, all types of planning studies. And we're going to continue to do that $1 million a year through the life of the plan. We believe that's provided a lot of value and helps kind of level the playing field, for our regional partners. Under the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure program, we've identified a lot of sidewalk gaps. But we also, identified a subset of those critical sidewalk gaps. Those were the ones closest to schools, closest to, where we have high crash issues, and also we looked at access in that category. So we identified critical sidewalk gaps, and we're setting aside $1 million a year to start resolving those. As part of this plan, we actually identified a lot of segments, and we've talked about this in the past, but we're bundling those segments into kind of sub areas. And we're going to be working with our transportation advisory committee in 2021 to start framing out that program. So we've set aside the funds, we've identified the gaps in question, those critical gaps, and then we're going to be working with our municipalities on timelines and implementation. So that's not locking everything in stone here. It's still providing us some flexibility and agility to solve some of these challenges. So that'll be an annual program coordinated through our transportation technical committee. Similarly, $1 million for school mobility a year. That supplements and really complements FDOT's Safe Routes to School program. So we still recommend our partners follow the Safe Routes to School program, and if things don't work out through that channel, we have our $1 million a year for school mobility, to still accomplish those, safe walking paths to school. Under the systems management operations, it's $1 million a year. We have been, in partnership with DOT, doing the regional signal retiming. We're going to continue that in the future. So again, that's just a one-to-one from the metropolitan transportation plan back to our annual operating budget. Similarly, we're identifying $1 million a year for our systems management operations committee to program another way of staying agile, another way to address some of those different project types that are hard to analyze. Things like, buying, mast arms at multiple intersections, or kind of new cabinets, or, kind of those smaller ticket items that have, that are area-wide, county-wide, city-wide. That's going to be coordinated through our Systems Management Operations Advisory Committee. Similarly, that Systems Management Advisory Committee will oversee our autonomous, connected, electric, and shared demonstration programs. That's $250,000 a year that we're identifying beginning in 2026 to start identifying those demonstration projects and it can use capital for those demonstration projects if they have that autonomous connected electric or shared element to them. So again, we haven't identified those projects explicitly within the MTP. Rather, we're referring to our ITS master plan and our CAV readiness study, and we'll be following through, like I said, with the systems management and operations group to really frame that one out and to set near-term priorities. Any questions about funding? I know that's a lot, and it is very different. But like I said, we believe this is, in short, funding what we say is most important in identifying programs to really accomplish and to try to meet our performance targets, especially as it relates to safety and technology. Any questions? Any hands? Unmute yourself. Keep things informal today. All right, seeing none, we'll keep moving forward. If anything pops up, comes to mind, of course, not your last call here. So next slide, please, Lelani. And the next key topic is prioritization. And what I'll say here is previous prioritization methods, followed the 2040 plans, goals, and objectives, and really focus primarily, at least in years past, on volume to capacity ratios. You've heard me, talk about that topic, and I'll mention it later. But about 3 years ago, with FHWA's kind of implementation and guidance on performance-based planning, we took a stab at reprioritizing our projects based on those federal performance measures. And really what we've done here is reflect that we have different goals and different performance targets. And because of that, we're using different data sources and different approaches to prioritizing projects. And we've talked about methods a lot, so I'm not going to go into detail here other than acknowledging that our needs assessment and our prioritization process is truly comprehensive, and really did acknowledge a lot of the things directly that historically we would have just considered, like health and things like safety and access. Those were core criteria here on equal par to capacity challenges and reliability concerns. So this really did provide a kind of holistic approach to prioritization, not just about throughput, but about quality of the system. So any questions on prioritization? I know this could be an hour presentation. In general, we do have a technical document on our website that kind of explores the different methods, data sources, and kind of parameters that we used as we developed our prioritization process. But the big takeaway here, it follows the goals and objectives. It follows what we said was most important. It is comparable to our prioritized project list process of the past 3 years. And we really did tap into big data as a means of analyzing these topics quantitatively. Go to the next slide, please. So the last one here is adoption by reference, and you've probably heard Nick and I talk about this a few times. But there are certain topics, there are certain projects and even programs that we include as part of our planning process to show that big picture, that big transportation picture. But there's an acknowledgement that it's kind of outside the realm of control for us as an MPO, where we have kind of authority in spending and obligating funds. But things that we include by reference and that we consider as part of our planning process, is our federal highway and FDOT goals and objectives for performance-based planning. We adopt and have adopted the state's recommendations for those performance targets, and we're going to continue to do that in the future. There's the strategic intermodal system, SIS. This is FDOT's, or really the state of Florida's, most critical transportation infrastructure, identified at a statewide level. In our area, it's really I-4, as it relates to kind of key corridors. There's some other connectors that serve some local hubs, but as it relates to investment and kind of big ticket projects, I-4 is really the only SIS major corridor in our region. But SIS, or FDOT, currently has a 2040 SIS cost feasible plan, in kind of their interim year plans. They're in the process actually of updating to 2045. We're not going to have that finalized information, by the time we adopt here, but I'll talk more specifics of what that means. But it's really just more here is an acknowledgement that we, consider that plan, we adopt it as it's stated in the plan by reference. So the projects that are identified in there, we adopt in, and as soon as the state finalizes their 2045 plan, we'll be coming back to our advisory committees and board and reporting those changes and modifying our plan accordingly. Similarly, toll-funded projects, managed, designed, operated, built, maintained by the Expressway Authority and by Florida's Turnpike Enterprise. Those are adopted by reference. We do coordinate with those agencies, and Will does serve on this working group. But as it relates to those projects, CFX is similarly in a process of updating their 2045 master plan and developing a 2045 ITS master plan in parallel. But we're going to be using, and what we've used for this plan is their 2040 master plan, which includes a lot of the Osceola County Expressway projects were included as part of that merged plan, and also looked at their capital improvement program. So we looked at their long range plan, their 2040 plan, and their short-term capital improvement program, and we've kind of forecasted that into the future. As soon as CFX, their governing board, adopts that updated plan, similarly, we'll bring that plan to our board and advisory committees and modify as needed. Similarly with Florida's Turnpike Enterprise and their system projects. Public-private partnerships, and in our case, this is really bright line. We're just acknowledging that things are happening, but by no means, things are happening, but nothing is concrete quite yet. So we're identifying that as part of our planning process. It's there, it's happening. It is absolutely transformational and impactful. And as those projects evolve and those public-private partnerships, come to fruition and shape up, we'll modify our plan accordingly. And as funds are spent, federal or state funds are spent, we'll make sure that, we're accounting for those projects and those partnerships. But the big picture there is just seeing the full transportation system, especially as it relates to vision. And locally funded projects provide that lower level, that local aspect of the network. So those we adopt by reference as well, both funding forecasts for 100% locally funded projects, and even the project lists themselves. Those needs are adopted by reference, and I'll talk about that a little later in my presentation. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So I was hoping Nick would have covered that, so you wouldn't hear me talk for an hour today, but we made it. So before I dive into kind of cost feasible projects, are there any questions on anything that the previous slides, key topics, things of that nature? Seeing some smiles and head nods, I'll just keep rolling with it. But again, if you have a question, raise your hand, or just feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question as we roll forward. So with that, I'm going to take a quick sip of water here, and we'll roll into the draft cost feasible plan. And it really is just that, a draft cost feasible plan. This is our first draft of it. We are in a public comment period and an agency comment period. So what I'm presenting to you today is as reported to the public within this draft plan. I will call attention to some comments that we've received and how we're responding to that feedback as well. So we can go to the next slide, please. So, I've hinted at this, and you've probably seen this as a part of every presentation I've had, but, we have to say it because this plan is shaped out. We had an end in mind for a different plan, and we told ourselves we would use different methods to, see that future. And this is that recognition of past plans would have identified and focused primarily on roadway widening projects. You would have seen a lot of 2 to 4s, 2 to 6s, 2 to 8s, 4 to 8s, you name it. That would have been the project list. We would have 1 or 2 lists, and that's what you would have seen Everything else was kind of considered and was addressed kind of after the fact, kind of through the planning process. But we tried to have a little more foresight, as we develop this long range plan. And in this plan, as you'll see within the project lists, we have a lot of different project lists. They resemble our prioritized project list, and that's intentional because we really do want to have a one-to-one long range plan going into a short-term capital program. So that's what you'll see, and we believe it provides a good framework, for expectations management, but also for prioritization. So we can go to the next slide, and these really are the project lists that you will see as part of the cost feasible plan. The first 2 or 3 lists, the interstate highway and toll funded project lists, CFX and the Turnpike Enterprise have their own list because of how those programs are managed and funds are separated. But those projects, again, are adopted by reference. Then we have our national highway and state highway system. Those are our other arterial and DDR funds that we use. I mentioned on a previous slide, on the funding policy slide, we have our off-state highway system capacity program. So those are local projects that we're using federal funds, to improve capacity on. And then we have our TMA lists, systems management and operations, our complete streets list, our bicycle, pedestrian, and trails, kind of our bike ped infrastructure list, regional transit, and then we have 3 for each of our counties, locally funded projects. We can go to the next slide, and I know at advisory committees, I've spent a fair amount of time kind of walking through this budget allocation table, kind of almost in a tutorial approach. I'm not going to do that today, but I do want to call attention to a couple topics about these tables, and I think why it's important, and also just acknowledge why the table looks the way it does. And in short, it's to satisfy the federal requirements on a couple topics. One is providing projects and present day costs, and the other is what we call year of expenditure, but that's basically implying inflation to cost in the future, and just acknowledging that the future will be more expensive than today. But every table will have at the very top a description in the top left corner that will basically specify where the funding program, what the funding program is, where the funds are flowing from. Also in the top right, you'll see really a ledger of available funds, and this is our kind of checkbook for available funds and spending on projects. This is a long range plan, so we are planning out until the year 2045 and beyond. But our plan year 1 really starts in 2026. That's the first year outside of our adopted transportation improvement program, which goes from 2020 to 2025. So you'll see the first projects on the list are those projects that I talked about earlier that are partially funded in the TIP, and we're following through with those projects first. So that's where, as you read the tables from left to right, you'll see that projects, as funds are available based on the priority order that they're in, we fund phases of project based on funding availability in logical implementation of a phase. And what I mean by that is, a lot of these projects, it's almost impossible to fund them, especially the larger ones, within a 5-year period, especially if they require, study, PD&E, takes 12 to 18 months, design, another, that could span pending, the length of the project. Right of way acquisition, it could take, another 6 to 18 months. Environmental mitigation, could take even more time. And construction, could take time. So it's really an acknowledgement. Previous plans, we assumed that a project could be implemented within a single band. This plan, provides a more implementation realistic approach, and that's what you'll see here. But we have plan period 1, which looks at funds available 2026 through 2030. Plan period 2 looks at the years 2031 through 35, and our last plan period is a 10-year band. That's 36 through 45. So that's the last 10. And as you read the lists from left to right, you'll see in some cases, on most lists, there is a point in time where we exhaust all of our available funds, and all remaining phases and all remaining subsequent projects are deemed unfunded or not cost feasible. And what that means is we're not able to advance those projects even in the preliminary phases that we identify. So that's, kind of a little bit about kind of the budget allocation tables. They're not the prettiest table, but it does satisfy all of our requirements with identifying all phases of every project, identifying costs in present day figures and present day values, applying the year of expenditure inflation rates, and then identifying unfunded phase and project costs. So the requirements require a lot of this to happen on the same table, and this was our best attempt of satisfying those requirements. I do see we had a question come in from Conroy. How does funding a phase locally impact the priority ranking after the adoption of the lists? So, the long range planning process is a living, these documents are living documents, and we do have procedures for modifications and amendments if the changes are that drastic. Conroy, we can talk offline, if there's specific projects in question, but I think what we want to acknowledge here is, we're not advancing priority. If the local government has the prerogative to, fund, preliminary engineering or the PD&E phase, and with an expectation of that project now rising, higher in priorities, that's not, the kind of protocol we're trying to follow as it relates to most of our priority lists. The only list that really requires local government funding phases to be eligible is our off-system capacity list, because we are only, based on the funding requirements, only able to spend for construction and construction engineering inspection phases. So that's where local governments would be required to advance and fund the preliminary phases to be eligible. Conroy, does that answer your question? Or if not, we can talk more offline, but let me know. Yes, I see yes. Very cool. But again, we can talk offline. And we do have this plan, we haven't adopted it yet, but it is like I said, a living process, and we continually update the plan, and we'll be readopting in 5 years again. So it's kind of that recognition of a continuous and cooperative planning process. So any other questions on budget allocation? I see a hand raised. Graciela.
Yes, this may be off base. I just pulled up the draft plan, and I don't see any reference to COVID, the pandemic, its impacts on, those revenue lines like gas taxes and things like this. Is it something that should be referenced in that planning document? I understand it's a living document, and it will, need to ebb and flow based on priorities and revenues and all of that, but should it be part of this document?
It could be, and if that's a suggestion, we can explore that. Where it is absolutely considered is in our scenario planning documentation, especially in the disruption dilemma kind of findings and next steps, where there is an absolute connection to there's decreased fuel consumption, there's decreased vehicle miles traveled, there's been some serious, travel behavior changes which impact revenue. We've heard different kind of magnitudes of shortfall. In the resolution that our board will be adopting, there will be some language in there that acknowledges, and we've had some conversation internally, staff, that we may need to modify this plan as soon as FDOT comes back with those new numbers. What are the shortfalls statewide? How do those impact the formula-based funds that we receive? And it's different for state funds versus federal funds versus how the continuing resolution works at the federal level, versus for the state's fund with the balanced budget, it works, a little bit differently on how they're kind of allocating funds. But it's an important acknowledgement, and I foresee us coming back and needing to update our forecast as soon as we actually have real numbers. Because what we have now is just an acknowledgement that, it's a pretty dramatic reduction, but not, quantified to what that actually means to our particular work program. But I believe DOT has until end of December, based on, I believe, the governor's order, which is kind of mandating FDOT to kind of come to those conclusions. What is the magnitude? How does that flow regionally, district-wide? And I'm sure soon after that, we'll be coming back to our advisory committees and board with a recommendation and a set of amendments, which will probably just push projects back. And kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier is ensuring that projects that are currently fully funded in our transportation improvement program continue to be that, no matter the changes. Those are our number one priorities, is finishing what we already started.
Yeah, I appreciate that they are certainly contemplated in the cost scenarios and such. So I would make a recommendation that it be referenced in the, large document that we have. It just seems to be, a very prominent issue that's missing, as we're going through this planning process. So I would recommend that there's a reference in this document.
Absolutely. We'll definitely do that. And as I talk about other changes that we'll be making, you won't see any changes to the draft documents for public review, but what we're doing as staff, as we're taking comments, we're working with the partner agencies and those who are providing comment, and we're already kind of going through the steps to make modifications to those plans. And that's something that we can definitely do. As part of this, just acknowledge that uncertainty and its significant impact on us. So great comment, Graciela, and we'll definitely address that. I see another comment in chat from Mayor McDonald. He said, Mayor Demings paused the efforts for the Orange County transportation surtax. Was that considered? Yes. And really how that was considered is in our financial forecasting process. So when we look at and I'll talk about this a little later on, but when we look at our locally available funds, that funding source shows up in our illustrative forecast, which is really just, a forecast to the side that says this is our transportation funding vision and acknowledge, kind of funding plan. But what we have to adopt based on the federal guidance is a forecast of existing sources, which in the case of Orange County does not include the Charter County transportation surtax. But what you'll see is, there is a connection and a need for additional funds, and obviously those sources are available, to partners to kind of, resolve that shortfall. So was considered, but more on the revenue side. The needs and priorities are constant. It's really more of a, revenue availability question. Thanks, Mayor. We can go to the next slide. Actually, before, I know we had a couple questions there. Don't see any other raised hands. Okay. So again, at any time, please ask questions. Strategic intermodal system, like I said before, the interstate highway system, this set of needs is adopted by reference. We particularly adopted them, from the SIS 2040 cost feasible plan, looked at the priorities in our prioritized project list and the transportation improvement program. So based on a lot of different sources, but the biggest caveat is those, like other plans, that long range plan is being updated right now and is likely considering the impacts of the pandemic on those revenue sources. So this is what we have based on the 2040 plan. That's what we're referencing, but just in due diligence, just in clarity, it's an acknowledging that, we have I-4 fully funded, the ultimate that we know at Kirkman to 434, but the 2040 cost feasible plan, SIS cost feasible plan, also has the northern and southern ultimate extensions. But those, like I said, are subject to change based on the update. And when we receive that, we'll bring that to our advisory committees. So pretty straightforward there. Go to the next slide. So the national and state highway system, this is table 9 of our priority list. And this is really our kind of multimodal list, if you look at them, kind of a multimodal combined list. It has complete streets types of projects. It has operational improvements. It has safety improvement projects. It has technology, kind of like ITS projects, and it does also have some widening projects. All projects on this list are on the state highway system, and that's very important because that's what makes them eligible to be to kind of tap into these resources. So a multimodal list, we have over the 2026 through 2045, we have 2.59 billion available in those other arterial or DDR funds. After we prioritize and fund all of our priorities, we still do have some unfunded needs, but I believe we are satisfying a great portion of those needs on the state highway system. A couple examples here, across the region. You can see, I think what's important to acknowledge here, though, is that needs assessment process that we followed. And again, of years past, it really would have been one measure, volume over capacity. And is that number greater than 1? And if so, we would have likely ranked the projects that way. That's hard to do when you're looking at complete streets projects where the main goal is not throughput. It is about reliability and safety and improving access. So our needs assessment, our prioritization process had to change to see these projects kind of bubble up to the top. And that's kind of symbolic of the goals and objectives that we have. So we're starting to see those connections, and it actually, as things shook out, it kind of made a lot of sense to us. The next table instead of list, we can go to the next slide, please, is our off-system highway list. Again, these are those other arterial funds that we are taking 10% from 26 to 45 and setting them aside for our local partners, to advance these priorities. As I mentioned in responding to Conroy's question, we are only funding in these with this program, the construction and CEI phases. CEI is construction engineering inspection phases. Those kind of go in parallel together. That's what we're funding. There's an expectation here that the local governments, fund those other phases. So what we're going to be doing as we start to implement the plan is coordinating with those local government partners, ensuring that they have kind of the wherewithal to fund and advance those priorities based on the implementation timeline that we have. And if not, we'll modify these priority lists. But what we're addressing here are high scoring reliability capacity challenges on the local network, and we're using these funds here. So 200, almost 300 million over the life of the plan. And the reason there's no unfunded needs here is because if it was an unfunded need, we actually just cut those projects over and pasted them back on to the appropriate locally funded project list wherever they were. So this is kind of a one-to-one unfunded needs list just because of how the program operates. Traditional plans would all of these needs and these revenues and project costs would just be required to be solved by local partners. We see an opportunity and a way to help, and that's through this program. Go to the next slide, please. So TSMO, Transportation Systems Management and Operations, and our ITS, Intelligent Transportation Solutions. These are technology improvements. This is about improving reliability, efficiency, and safety, kind of through these proven, operational solutions and technology solutions. This process is managed by our Systems Management and Operation Advisory Committee. You'll see a few different project types on that list, and it kind of refers back to the funding policies and programs I talked about earlier in the presentation. We do have our annual signal retiming as a recurring priority year over year through the life of the plan. So that's going to, ensure that we can do our very best to keep those signals in tune. We also have the autonomous and connected and electric shared demo program. So again, I mentioned it before that that's going to be coordinated and managed through our advisory committee process. And the other needs that you'll see here really relate to solving operational challenges. So where do we have travel time reliability issues, especially on constrained corridors? So in years past, if you had a constrained corridor in your municipality, in your area, we would have kind of put it to the side because we're just widening, right? And if you were constrained and you weren't widening, that's kind of how things played out. So this program looked at where we had reliability issues on constrained corridors, where we had gaps in active and actively monitored and managed systems. So we're going to actually be investing in the technology necessary to operate that kind of adaptive infrastructure. This, again, like I said, and I keep repeating myself, but managed through the systems management and operations group, and that's important to note because they meet and their focus, it really is long term, but with really that short term impact required in these types of investments. So, any questions on this project list from anyone? All right. Just the other takeaway here before I move on to the next slide is really the unfunded need. And I think it's important to acknowledge here, and it came out of our scenario planning process too. Is and even our the feedback we received from public participation, more smart, they want a high tech system. We have a regional program that's proven to have that impact. We do the benefit cost to see those impacts. But through this needs assessment and what came out of our ITS master plan, CAD readiness study, there really is an acknowledgement that this is a valuable type and responsive type of strategy. But as you can see here, we do have significant unfunded needs as it relates to this category. And go to the next slide, please. Complete streets, right? So again, past processes would not have identified complete streets as part of the planning process. It was more just roadway widening projects. We did amend some of these context sensitive improvements into our 2040 plan, to be consistent with our prioritized project list. But this plan, through the needs assessment process, identified, similarly, where is there the desire? Where does it make sense to have, safety and improvements? Where are there opportunities to improve access? Where are there constraints that still need, multimodal improvements, like, improved bike lanes and sidewalks, where appropriate. And this plan is really an acknowledgement of the kind of the complete streets paradigm shift, and you heard me talk about that early in the process. It really kind of puts the user really at the forefront, of the planning process. And this is consistent with Metro Plan Orlando's complete streets policy. And so for funding, but also kind of our global complete streets policy. Only 203 million, it's 32% of our federal urbanized area funds through the life of the plan. We're able to accomplish a lot of good projects. But as you can see, we still have about $148 million shortfall as it relates to unfunded needs, and that will continue to grow, in the future. But as you can see, we are funding projects really across the region, and some of these projects are actually currently being studied right now. So it's kind of good to see projects kind of flow immediately from study, into development, so we can see those impacts almost immediately. Any questions about our complete streets list? Not seeing any nods or any hands. All right, we can go to the next slide, which is our active transportation ped bike infrastructure. Similar past plans did not have a cost feasible element for pedestrian and bicycle. We were just kind of referred to how much money we had, and we coordinated it through our advisory committees. But again, based on needs assessment, feedback we received from the public, this is a cost feasible list of pedestrian, bicycle, and trail infrastructure. You will see the two programs that I spoke about in the table as a recurring program. That's the Critical Sidewalk Gaps program. It's going to be a regional program. coordinated by our technical advisory committee, similarly with our school mobility program. So these are a lot of our trails are what we call shared use paths that those needs and plans that have been, studied for decades, and a lot of these priorities have been on our prioritized project list for many years. But as you can see, based on available resources, we do have a lot of unfunded active transportation needs, but we are accomplishing a lot. Here, you will see multiple segments of the Shingle Creek Trail in Osceola and Orange County fully funded, as well as some projects in the city of Orlando, as well as Seminole County. Any questions about pedestrian, bicycle, and trails? I know this is not the most exciting of topics. Kind of seeing the head nods. All right, we can go to the next slide. Regional transit. So as Cynthia mentioned early on, this is what the public wanted: more places, more frequency across the board. This list, and kind of taking a step back, past plans really focused on the premium projects, kind of the big, really attractive projects, light rail from here to there, kind of the really big stuff. This plan, again, took that implementation, kind of the realism approach, and said, what do we need to do to get there? It's not just about high frequency service. In a couple places, there is a need to serve the masses, and there is a need to provide increased and enhanced service to even serve these other types of premium transit services. So we took an implementation focused approach to this, and also, similar to the other modes, we have to respect the funding eligibility for the federal funds that we have control over, and these are capital funds. And that's important as we have a discussion about premium transit service, and any service for that matter. There's the capital funds, and then there's the operations and maintenance funds, and I'll talk about that more here in a second. But based on our available resources, the available revenues, 26 through 45, $2.45 billion, worth of project improvements, and using those revenues. But what can we get for that? And this is where, I have been really clear, and I want to continue that message, to all of our partners, is, what we can afford based on our existing resources is fixed route service provided by links at the existing level of service. So as you see it today is what we're able to afford in this plan into the future. That does account for costs based on cost increases based on inflation, but based on revenue matches and available operations and maintenance funds, that's what we are seeing, as part of this. Similarly, Sunrail service at existing operations, and the commuter rail operations schedule as you see it today into the future. We're accounting for inflation of costs, but as it relates to the level of transit service, it's at existing operations. What can we afford other than kind of this on the service front? Remember, we have these capital funds. We are able, and you've heard me talk about the great need for new and improved and satellite locations for the Links Operations Center. The current operations center, Princeton Jungyang Parkway area, is over capacity. Even serving its current level of service today. But what we're able to fund with the capital funds available in the 2045 plan is a new southern operations base, likely located in Osceola County, and a northern operations center for bus services, likely located in Seminole County. Those locations aren't identified as part of the plan, rather, identifying the funds for those projects, to be studied, right of way to be required, and constructed. Similarly, there's a few Sunrail stations that are currently over capacity as it relates to parking availability, and we're able to, using our capital funds, the Meadowwoods, Tupperware, and Point Sienna Sunrail stations, would see parking capacity increases. Metro Plan Orlando is actually going to be working with FDOT in 2021 to actually lead a study as it relates to parking expansion, what that will be, what it's shaped up, kind of feasibility, and then kind of getting into a concept for those. But that is cost feasible. And then again, what can we afford? We do have capital funds available for some service and facility improvements. So some of the vertical infrastructure, vertical transit infrastructure. And we also have enough funds for the capital to get Sunrail to the airport, but we do not have the corresponding operations and maintenance funds. So that project, while capital funds are available, they're actually left on the table because we do not have the necessary operations and maintenance commitment to operate that level of service, kind of going back to Sunrail service at existing operations. So this is, not the news I wanted to come forward with, especially, with the feedback that we receive from the public. But, we believe this plan is important for managing expectations and what things will look like at existing with existing revenues and existing sources. And this is one of those issues that it is acknowledged. We have a transit vision, and based on the available resources, we have to tap into other sources to see that vision to fruition. It's as simple as that. Any questions or comments on regional transit, or is everyone's kind of still soaking that in? None? Give you guys another second. You guys got to give me a break. I'm talking too much here today.
My only reaction, Alex, is that, I think that specifically on these regional transit elements, it's just highlights the need for, the public-private partnerships that make these types of projects a reality. When you look at, who may stand to, benefit in a sense. But that's a big number for unfunded needs. And I think that the idea of public-private partnerships and what does that look like as the economy looks to recover in certain industry segments. So just a lot going on there on that slide. A lot of thoughts.
Right, and I think it's important to note, and we use the term need, it's and desire interchangeably, and I guess it matters who you're talking to. But yeah, it's those unfunded needs include the premium transit services that we've talked about, but also a lot of enhancements to the existing fixed route network. It's just improving frequency, cutting frequency in half or in a third, comes at a great cost, both on the capital, but even on the driver's, kind of on the operating labor side. Kelly, did you have a comment, a question?
It was more of and it's kind of specific. So I guess phase 2 north technically wouldn't even be part of our NTP, is that right? But I was wondering what the status is of that, connecting to DeLand. I thought I saw a headline about it recently, but where is that versus phase 3?
Right, and that the phase DeBerry to DeLand, would be in our partner agency, the River to Sea TPO, kind of the Volusia County NPO area. That would be in their plan. I don't have an answer for you, a good answer for you on the status of that. It's kind of in flux, but I think as it relates to your question on phase 3, it's a matter of what we use our funds for and why we are able to even fund the capital side of that project. But the real acknowledgement here is, we will have the funds necessary, the federal funds to kind of jumpstart these projects. But until we kind of recognize that long-term, local or regional solution, our transit vision is really just that.
Just curious, don't know if you know off the top of your head, right of way, how much of that makes up the budget there, right of way acquisition?
I don't have that number offhand and Yeah, I don't have that number offhand. Are you referring to the Sunrail Phase 3 project, or just in general?
Just in general.
I would have to take a look. A lot of the right of way on the transit side, would be for purchasing those parcels, for the parking lot expansion and for the operation centers. So those are kind of included in the overall cost. But it's an important acknowledgement, as we continue to grow as a urbanized area, we continue to suburbanize ourselves. Finding right of way, affordable right of way in the right place becomes more challenging in the future as land is developed and is taken for other uses. It's an acknowledgement that if this is our vision and our need, we need to act soon. Otherwise, it's going to become even more challenging to see that through, and the right of way costs will be even greater. I'll follow up with you though, Graciela or Nick. I heard you on the line. You there?
Yeah, let me jump in. Graciela, we if I had to say right away, would be anywhere between 25% and 35% of the cost. It just depended on the project itself. But something we added into this plan, which hasn't been done in the past, is we added an environmental component. So the right of way itself, if you looked at it holistically with this plan, will be a lot more than the ones in the past. So we can account for the mitigation needed, or even just the environmental permitting and the other costs involved. So we think that our cost model may be a little bit more accurate than older ones, because we did take that into account.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Any other questions on transit or any other topic? Seeing none, we'll go to the final, I believe, our last list. And this is our locally funded list. And, as I mentioned before, we adopt these lists, by reference, and the ultimate discretion for implementation is by our local partners through their annual capital improvement programs. I do want to call attention to an error that we had and kind of correct, a statement that I made during our technical advisory committee presentation. We were previously showing, Orange County only having $234 million, for capital improvements, 26 through 45. We were able to coordinate with, Orange County to get that updated figure. That new number is 1.7 billion. So I know we were off substantially there. The error was, we were actually only considering impact fee revenues for future improvements, but the county does use portions of their fuel tax, and their invest program to fund their future transportation program. So as we amend, or rather, as we modify the cost feasible plan for the draft that will be taken to our board for adoption, you will see that table updated in the budget at the top will reflect that 1.7 billion. So these locally funded projects, again, so I just wanted to call attention to that to make sure that correction was made, especially for our technical advisory committee members and our citizens advisory committee members who heard a different number. But across the board, as you can see, there's still a pretty significant shortfall between available revenues and needs. You've seen that really across all of our lists. And that's just kind of the acknowledgement of the planning process. We didn't want to sugarcoat, I guess, anything during this planning process. We needed, this to kind of be, a realistic examination of needs and of revenues. And I think we have that here. So we can go to the next slide, which talks about kind of just putting it all together. So the by the billions, these numbers are updated as well that reflect that increase in revenue available in the Orange County category. But we're looking at almost 26 billion in investment through the years 26 through 45, and it is important to note that is all federal, all state, all local, and all toll investment. And in toll investment, we haven't talked about it a lot here, and we do acknowledge it, and adopt it by reference. But it's important to acknowledge the level and magnitude of that investment. That's almost 50% of our transportation investment is toll funded, user funded, through different bonds of sorts. So just important to note there, and you'll see that in our financial resources, a clear accounting of how much money we have as an agency for spending, and where that control lies. Still a big deficit though, as it relates to unfunded needs. No matter, I think this is my second long range plan here, but I've done a few elsewhere, and it's pretty common to have that level. It's an unfortunate commonness, but there always is that shortfall, which really raises the question of then what, kind of asking that next what if question, if this is the plan based on existing resources. So that's the funding picture, not the best one. And to Graciella's point, it may be further aggravated by the shortfalls that we are seeing, and are feeling, today, and have, and probably will continue. So we'll make sure that we reflect that in the document, and acknowledging that this will continue to live through that, and we will respond with those updated forecasts as that information is provided to us. But some positive takeaways, and I want to end on a good note here, right? This plan really did, focus on all users. Pandemic aside, we scoped this with an end in mind, to be complete streets focused, to be, environmentally conscious, to be focused on improving health, to focus on everything almost except volume to capacity ratios, right? It was kind of, let's flip the script for this plan. And because of that, we identified a lot of projects, a lot of opportunities that we never would have. And because of that, we wouldn't have been able to fund those projects in this plan. So different methods gave us, kind of different outcomes. And I think that's a very positive note, and that does align with the public feedback that we've received. But at the end of the day, like I said, our funds, available funds greatly outweigh our current projections. As I mentioned, we do also have an illustrative projection, which in many cases has our local governments looking at sales tax revenues for transportation. Again, illustrative, parallel, not adopted as part of this process, but at any time, if a local government enacted, changed their funding resources, we would be able to modify our plan accordingly, and we would update our plan to show the impact of those projects. So with that being said, I know before we move on into the next topic, I believe that's it for cost feasible plan. So I wanted to, kind of give you guys another opportunity. I know the virtual format of this meeting, kind of takes some of the roundtable discussion away from, what we originally intended. But I just want to give you guys an opportunity again to share your thoughts, maybe a reflection on the 2045 plan, as it's presented. And if not, we can roll into kind of the next chapter of our meeting. And I promise I will not call on anyone, because everyone who talks is on my top queue. So those are the only faces that I see. Does anyone else, especially our non-traditional partners,
Cheryl's got her hand up.
insights? Yeah, Cheryl, please.
Hey, I wanted to really let you know how much I appreciate all the work that you all have done on this. And I wanted to bring up, I don't know if this is exactly the specific time, but because of the virus situation and the world that we're living in, this is a unique opportunity for persons, seniors and people with disabilities, to realize that they may need to be less dependent on transit, which may help the overall picture for the future. When you look at seniors who may not want to or be able to drive themselves as much as they did in the past, or people with disabilities who don't have those opportunities. I hope that we'll see possibility more neighborhood transportation like the neighborhood link, so that we have these groups of people that are able to travel more within their circle of where their stores and friends and places to hang out are. There's just a lot more opportunities now. Sadly, the whole virus situation has brought this opportunity to people who are older and maybe retired and want to have some part-time job opportunities. And of course, people with different types of disabilities, mobility, vision, et cetera, to work from home. And this hasn't been a very wide opportunity for us, because it made us seem special in the past. But now, when a great swath of people with and without disabilities, younger and older, are working from home, we now can fit in. And it's kind of exciting, because the employment opportunities are opening up for us, and this decreases a major barrier for people with disabilities, because transportation has always been something that has kept us from being as gainfully employed as we have liked to have been, or employed at all. So I'm hoping that this trend continues with working from home and opening up those opportunities. And by way of that, I think we may see a lot less dependence on some fixed route, but especially the accessible transportation, such as access links, which is so very, very expensive. And again, that type of transportation is a barrier because of the way it is worldwide and nationwide to employment. I just think that we're going to have better access with neighborhood type situations to shopping, to personal needs, and not be so dependent on more expensive types of transportation. So maybe this will mitigate some of the costs to a degree, because that is a great drain. The access links, et cetera, is a great drain on public transit. So I just wanted to get that pitch in there.
Oh, thank you. Well said. Does anyone else have any comments? I mentioned this as, especially our non-traditional partners, or those who don't, actively participate in our advisory, board. This kind of, forum is really, especially helpful to our other partner agencies to kind of hear your feedback in this realm. Bob, thoughts? I know you. That's why I call on you, Bob O'Malley. Any insights as part of the process? I promise that's the only person I'll call out.
No thoughts. So.
All right, that's what you get. Sorry. Either way, we do appreciate your. I think that's just another opportunity for us to thank this group. We started out face to face, and we've evolved. With the time. So this wasn't as we intended. We envisioned kind of the round table discussion. To kind of hear the diversity and inclusiveness of this group. But with all that being said, I think this is a good segue to kind of the next part of today's meeting, which is an open discussion that Cynthia will lead. Cynthia?
All right, thank you. Leilani, we could stop screen share for the moment so that we can all see each other in our gallery view here. So again, we wanted to say thank you. And we wanted to hear your feedback. Since this is our last meeting, this is really the first long-range plan where we have pulled together kind of a cross-sector group like this. Previously, we really just engaged our committee members in a working group style format, but this time we brought in, you know, a lot of partners that maybe wouldn't typically be involved in our process, so that we could get a good mix of opinions. And we think from our end, it's been really valuable to us to hear the variety of opinions. So we just wanted to take some time today and ask you, you know, what has this experience been like for you? What are the pros and cons? Do you have any suggestions for us for the next time we do a long range plan on how we can improve this process? So with that, I will leave it open, and Alex and I will do a lot of listening, and hopefully you all will do a lot of talking. And in the spirit of a roundtable discussion, I want to just go through and call on everybody and give everybody a chance. You feel free to say pass or whatever if you don't have any comments. But I'll take volunteers first before I start calling on people. If anybody wants to jump in and share how you can, Bill Wharton, thank you. And you were at the top of the list anyway.
Yeah, well, I figured I was coming up, so I have to hand it to y'all, especially Alex. This is a tremendous amount of work to produce, and a lot of information to absorb. And I think Alex has done a very good job on presenting it, so we could break it down and try and understand everything. Obviously, being different than what we've done before, so I think that's, you know, taking a little bit of adjustment to get used to it. And even going back to, I guess it was last year when we did the you know, the new ranking of projects. I can remember when we did the final vote on that. I think a lot of people were expecting some discussion, but you know, it was done and it was done. But again, just wanted to say, I think a lot of information presented in a good format to, I'm not going to say I understand all of it, but it's, you know, just been very helpful, and thank to the staff there down there, Metro Plan.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. I see Denise, I see your hand up.
Yes. Similar to Mr. Wharton, I don't understand it all, but what I do understand and I am pleased is that being a part of this, I have a better confidence that the planners and the developers have an investment of the health impact on the decisions that are being made, not just with transportation, but looking at the health impact and seeing the word public health in these documents is so important. So thank you for allowing the health department to have a voice at these meetings, but also with Metro Plan, because after we build it and fund it and pay for it and repave it, at the end of the day, if the people are using it for recreation and it benefits their health, then I'm all good with that. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Mayor McDonald?
Oh, everybody, thank you. You don't want to see me because my phone is dying and I'm charging it in a spot where it's dead, completely dark. So I look better today. So, but again, thinking of it, and Graciela will appreciate it, and you and Alex will as well. You know, I'm a Maitland guy and I'm an Orange County guy, and that being able to see a vision that is, again, going to be contingent on lots of conditions and things that come before us in the future. It's such a treat to see somebody thinking further ahead, you know, and being willing to have the character to commit to some plans. Obviously, you know, I've got my, you know, personal Maitland projects that I'd love to see that relate to North Orange County and South Seminole County and the issues that we have, you know, and I so have enjoyed the opportunity to sit in person when we could, because that's where the best work gets done, and we all know that. So, you know, bah humbug to the virus, and that we don't get to look eyeball to eyeball and be as extemporaneous as we might like to be. But it's a fabulous effort, and I've really enjoyed being invited to participate.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much. And I can say from staff that, we really appreciate the support from our elected officials. So thank you for being our champion there.
Amen. I like being a champion.
All right. Any other volunteers before I start calling down the list? Bob, you're next anyway.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thanks for volunteering before I called on you.
I think the working group here was run very well, diverse opinions, and I think that was a nice compliment to the overall public involvement outreach that you did. I think you did a great job. You kind of had the metrics up earlier on one of the earlier slides, and I think that just you really MetroPlan's really done a good job reaching out to the community and getting different perspectives on the plan. So I congratulate you for that, and appreciate being involved in this working group. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Anybody else? Graciela?
I was, Bob, you basically took my remarks. Kudos to the team at MetroPlan. It was a lot of information, complicated, and we have a number of technical experts in the group, but we also have a number transportation technical experts, but we also have a lot of experts in their own field who represent clients, who represent certain contingencies of our community that are really important to have a perspective in this conversation. So I think the mix of, getting some of those non-traditional partners involved in the conversation so you can have more of this eclectic, feedback and building a plan really, really benefited the conversation, and I think ultimately benefited the plan that will move forward. So again, congratulations to the team, but congratulations to this work group. I know that our time was, routine, far apart, and many a times when I was coming into the meetings, I'm like, oh yeah, where did we end? Where did we start? And I had to kind of re-engage. So if I was going to make any kind of feedback, perhaps meeting a little more often to keep things top of mind, and keep the conversation just relevant and robust.
Amen.
And I will say we were a little worried about taking too much of your time and maybe being a little bit like an uninvited guest. So we'll try to strike a little bit better balance next time with keeping you engaged and respecting your time as well. And if there's anything we can do, I know for those of you who aren't typically involved in transportation that it might have been a little bit like drinking from a fire hose at times during these meetings. So if there's anything that we can do from our perspective to make that easier for you in the future, if you have suggestions, we're all ears on that as well. Cheryl, I see your hand up.
Of course, my hand's up.
Thank you.
I just wanted to thank everybody also, the people before me said everything that I feel. I really appreciate being asked to be a part of this group. The diversity of the group is phenomenal and very much needed for something with as broad of a scope as the 2045 plan. I probably won't be here. It would be very, hard for me to be here at that age to see how well this works, but knowing the work that MetroPlan and all of you people do day after day, year after year, decade after decade. If anybody can pull it off, MetroPlan can, with the help of the people from the community. And this has been a great opportunity. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate. And thank you all.
Thanks. Well, it'll be 5 years till we update our next one, so you'll definitely be around for that.
I better.
Yep. Will, I see your hand. Thanks for volunteering.
Absolutely. Good morning. I want to thank you for all the work that you've done. It is an enormous amount of work. As Alex said, we're getting ready to start our master plan. So I'm very aware of what goes into it. And I got to say, my biggest takeaway is, looking outside the box a bit more and not just looking at widening projects. We're starting to do a very similar approach on 408. We got to, that's pretty much a constrained corridor. So we're trying to think of what the other options are as we move into the future. So I appreciate that, and really it's all positive feedback. Thanks again for including me.
Thank you. And of course, we will be there to support you guys' updates. So anytime you guys need our support, don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, if I could add one more random thought,
Sure.
Cynthia, and I want to echo what everybody else has said, and the commitment and the things that Cheryl said about us doing the hard work, trying to do and help you guys do the hard work now is what pays off 20 years from now. And the advocacy, in addition to the the efforts to make this all work, this is going to require a great deal of community support and advocacy every single place that we can do this, whether it's at my city council meetings, whether it's at our civic club meetings, if it's at schools, and just talking this stuff up, because frankly we're paying the price now for not doing these things 25 years ago. So it's time for us to stand up and be the adult in the room when those opportunities arise. Thanks. Never leave me alone with an open microphone.
And we're always available. If you need assistance or speakers for those groups that you just mentioned, give us a ring. Conroy, thank you for your comments in the chat box. Conroy, he says, great job. Enjoyed working with our regional partners. We made great progress as a group and looking forward to continued partnership. Lee, you're up.
Okay, so I've been very grateful for the opportunity to participate in this. RCID doesn't receive any funds from state or federal or anything like that. So it's been, but I know how important those are to everyone else, but we do though are very much involved in or have the need for the transportation systems. We very greatly rely on the links service, and I just wish it was so much easier to get them more funding. It's such a huge challenge, but there's so many people that really depend on that and need it, and I do. I really like the scenario planning in this, and also the like everyone else has said, more projects that are not just, let's widen the road, because we all know that simply brings more traffic and we never really catch up.
Yep, you said it.
Yeah, we just keep making them wider. But it's been a great opportunity. I want to thank all of you for all your hard work and for, and hope that, we can make progress. We can find more money somewhere to fund some of these projects that, when you look at a $7 billion, still needed and unfunded, it's just so disheartening, I think. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that's part of the kind of the hard part of what we do is calling attention to the challenges as well. So thank you. Anybody else who hasn't spoken yet?
I'll go ahead, Cynthia.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, of course. So on behalf of the Orlando Economic Partnership and the Alliance for Regional Transportation, I just want to ensure that you all know that the business community is in full support of this plan. I think you guys have done an excellent job in really putting some teeth to it and ensuring that this really complex information is communicated to the community at large in a way that they can understand it. My background is Medicaid funding, so I always thought that was the most complex in terms of funding, but I think transportation may give it a run for its money. But overall, I just want to thank you guys for adding me. I was kind of involved in the very end of things, but have been really impressed and grateful for all the hard work that MetroPlan put into this. And as well, anytime that you guys need support from the business community at large, please contact me and I'll help you any way I can. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, couldn't do it without our business community partners. So we appreciate the connections there.
And I'll try to find you some money too, okay?
Yes, please.
Working on it.
All right, others we haven't heard from? I won't put you on the spot since so many people volunteered. But I'll give you just one more second to chime into the conversation.
I'll just say that I really appreciate this group and the diversity of representation here. I think that was a great idea. I think in the future, because I guess it'll be less than 4 years before you're really starting this process again.
Right.
It might be good to have some kind of hybrid of options where maybe you have a virtual option, but in person, I think is great if you can make the meetings and, but I think we've also got better participation through the virtual options. I think that's good. I do think that this MTP pushes the envelope way more than past ones have. Is the most specific that I recall as far as complete streets and bike ped. I think past ones treated that very generically, and I don't remember seeing a litany of those projects actually in the MTP. I think that's a big step, but I think that we have a long way to go and need to push the envelope more with the next iteration. To Lee's point, I've started thinking, I think it's actually might be useful information so people understand there are trade-offs when it comes to our limited funding and what we can fund with our transportation. I know that not all funding sources can be used for all things, and that requires state and federal changes to happen. But when you're looking at, for example, $1 billion interchange, which apparently 408 and I-4 was, that is hard to wrap your head around. I've started deciding, well, I'm going to start referring to that as 1,000 miles of shared use paths that we could have built. Because I think if people start thinking that way, like, oh, is it worth 1,000 miles of shared use paths? Then maybe we'll start to see more shifts toward a healthier transportation system that really is multimodal and supports transit.
It's a great way to make that comparison. I like that. Anybody else before we wrap up? Okay, well, thank you so much for the wonderful feedback. I think you saw me taking some notes, so I'm gonna put together some best practices and suggestions and file that away for the next time that we update I guess it'll be the 2050 plan then. So Alex, I'll pass it back to you to wrap up the meeting.
Thank you, Cynthia. And before we move on to the public comment portion of the meeting, I again just want to reiterate and say thank you to each of you. This was our first time using kind of that cross-sectoral group. We had after kind of listening to your comments, we had reservations on taking too much of your time, and we kind of batted around that, how to move forward. So this is super helpful. Cynthia and I were taking notes. I'm sure others were too, because we do have advisory groups, and for other projects of other types. So the feedback that you're providing, here today will definitely be considered, before we do another long range plan. We do have these advisory groups or corridor and sub area and other special studies that we conduct. So great content. Milani, can we go back to the slides if you could? Is just to comply, with our posted agenda. We are going to open things up to public comment. You go like 3 slides. Actually, we'll go here first. That'd probably be a better place to kind of wrap things up. Just to kind of summarize everything where we're at today. So we opened our public comment period on October 16th, and we close that period, or will be closing that period on November 20th. As I presented to our technical advisory committee, we are asking our agency partners to provide their feedback a week in advance on the 13th, and that'll help us iterate and respond and coordinate with you to address any comments that you may have, before that public comment period ends. So continuous, coordination over really the next 3 to 4 weeks. As Cynthia mentioned in her presentation, we do have our virtual public meeting, the plan reveal on the 9th. So this upcoming Monday, check it out. You can find the link and ways to access that on our website. Over the next couple of weeks, actually later this month, and on December 9th, our board will be taking up the plan as an updated version, including the public and agency comment at their December 9th board meeting. And then to Graciella's point, we will be monitoring these revenue shortfalls and those impacts on the projects near and long term. And we'll be coming back to our advisory committees and board to discuss any impacts that are subject to the long range planning process. We can go to the next slide. And you can go probably about 3 slides forward. We've kind of addressed all of that, but let's open things up to the public comments. And if anyone or any members of the public wish to comment at this time, please use the raise hands function, and you'll be recognized. Or if you're on the phone, please dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll unmute you. After you're recognized, please state your name and your contact information, and we will limit your comments to 2 minutes. Cynthia, do we have any comments at this time?
No comments. I don't see any hands raised.
And did we receive any written or phone comments in advance of the meeting?
No, we did not.
Okay, great. So we can go to the 2 more slides. I guess it's that simple. So again, I just want to say thank you. We'll definitely be in touch. This is, our last kind of virtual meeting, but Cynthia and I will definitely be engaging with you over the next couple of weeks, and we'll definitely share the outcomes, of the planning process. But do check out the plan, and if you can participate in that final reveal, it'd be greatly appreciated. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you again, everyone, and I look forward to seeing each of you face to face, hopefully in the near future.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.